the late autumn of 1898, the twin chimneys of the steamship Faraday poured black coal smoke into a gray Atlantic sky. For 3 weeks, she had ridden the heavy swells 300 miles off the coast of Ireland, her iron hull groaning against the waves as she performed a task that would have seemed like madness to our ancestors. Below her decks, in massive circular iron tanks, lay 2,000 miles of copper wire, wrapped in hemp and sealed in the dark, resinous sap of the gutta percha tree. This was the transatlantic telegraph cable, a single, fragile thread of human thought that we were dropping into the absolute darkness of the ocean floor, hoping to bind 2 continents together with the speed of light. To the men who sailed her, the ocean was not a space to be explored, but a wilderness to be crossed. They knew the surface, the cold lash of the wind, the rise and fall of the gray rollers, and the sudden, blinding fogs that could isolate a ship from the rest of the world in a matter of minutes. But of the world below the keel, they knew almost nothing. To them, the seabed was a silent, unmapped desert of freezing mud and crushing pressures, a place where life could not exist and where the sun had never shone. It was a tomb for broken ships and lost men, a vast and quiet emptiness that lay between the worlds of the living. We went there only to leave our wires, dropping them into the dark like anchor chains we never intended to pull back up. On the 3rd Tuesday of October, the sea had grown quiet, though the sky remained the color of wet slate. In the Faraday's test room, a small cabin situated deep within the ship's structure to isolate it from the vibration of the engines, the air was thick with the smell of paraffin oil, damp wool, and the sharp metallic tang of battery acid. Here sat Arthur, a young telegraph operator from London, whose ears had been trained to find meaning in the smallest clicks of a brass key. Before him sat the mirror galvanometer, a delicate instrument of silk threads, tiny magnets, and a mirror no larger than a fingernail. An oil lamp cast a narrow beam of light onto the mirror, reflecting a spot of green light onto a graduated scale on the wall. So long as the cable was intact, the green spot would drift lazily near the 0 mark, waiting for the sudden, sharp swings that signaled a message from the station at Valencia. Arthur's hand was resting on the brass key, his eyes fixed on the scale. For 12 hours, the cable had been silent, save for the occasional, erratic twitch of the light caused by the Earth's own magnetic currents, what the engineers called the Earth voice. These were the natural, formless murmurs of the planet, the static of lightning storms in the mid-Atlantic or the slow shifting of magnetic fields across the continents. They were meaningless noise, a low hum that Arthur had learned to ignore, the way a man ignores the wind outside his window. The cable was a dead thing, a long copper nerve stretching down into the dark, and it was his job to wait for the spark of human intelligence to bring it to life. But at 40 minutes past 2 in the morning, the green spot of light did not twitch. It moved. It did not jump with the sharp, nervous energy of a telegraph operator's hand. Instead, it slid smoothly across the scale, paused for a fraction of a second, and then returned to its starting point with a slow, deliberate grace. Arthur leaned forward, his hand tightening on the edge of the table. He watched the light drift again. 10 scale divisions to the left. A pause. 10 divisions to the right. Pause. Then, 3 short, rhythmic pulses, each one identical to the last, followed by a long, steady deflection that held its position for 5 seconds before releasing. Arthur adjusted the shunts on the galvanometer, thinking that a leakage of current from the ship's dynamos had found its way into the line. But the dynamos were shut down for the night, and the test room batteries were reading a steady, unchanging voltage. He checked the copper ground wire that ran from the table down through the ship's hull into the sea. The connection was clean. Yet on the wall, the green spot of light continued to dance, tracing a sequence that was too regular, too structured to be the product of chance. It was not Morse code. There were no letters here, no familiar combinations of dots and dashes that Arthur had spent his youth committing to memory. It was something else. A cadence. A slow, rhythmic respiration, like a pulse traveling through a sleeping body. Kelvin, Arthur whispered into the empty room. He did not call the physicist by his title. In that quiet cabin, beneath the weight of the Atlantic, the old man's peerage seemed as distant as the shore. Lord Kelvin, born William Thompson, was asleep in his stateroom 3 decks above. He was 74 years old, the undisputed master of Victorian physics, the man who had formulated the laws of thermodynamics and designed the very instruments that made the ocean cable possible. For Kelvin, the deep ocean was a physical problem to be solved with mathematics, a silent reservoir of cold water that behaved according to the laws of hydrostatic pressure. When Kelvin entered the test room 10 minutes later, his woolen coat draped over his nightshirt, he did not speak. He simply stood behind Arthur, his breath warm in the cold air of the cabin, his pale eyes reflecting the green spot of light on the scale. He watched the mirror swing. Left. 3 pulses. A long hold. The pattern repeated, then changed, the intervals between the movements shifting with a mathematical precision that made the old man's chest tighten. "It is a periodic function," Kelvin said, his voice dry and scratchy from sleep. "A Fourier series, Arthur. The intervals are doubling. Look at the scale." "I have checked the insulation, my lord," Arthur said, his hand trembling slightly as he held the logbook. "There is no leakage. The Valencia station has been silent since midnight. They are not transmitting. This is coming from the sea." "Nonsense," Kelvin muttered, though he did not move away from the scale. "A cable is a closed circuit, boy. If Ireland is silent, then the wire is dead. It is a magnetic storm. The sunspots are active this season." "But the sunspots do not count, sir," Arthur replied softly. He pointed to the logbook where he had began to tally the deflections. "It is counting. 1, then 2, then 4, then 8. It has repeated the sequence 5 times since I called you." A magnetic storm does not study geometry. Kelvin reached out and tapped the brass frame of the galvanometer, as if hoping to shake the mirror free of some invisible dust. The instrument did not falter. The green spot of light performed its slow, silent waltz across the white paper scale, indifferent to the old man's touch. Kelvin sat down on the second stool, his fingers tracing the edge of his beard. He was a man who had spent his life bringing order to the unseen forces of the world, mapping the invisible currents of heat and electricity with neat, elegant equations. But as he sat in the dim light of the cabin, listening to the creaking of the Faraday's timbers and the distant, muffled thud of the swell against the hull, he felt the first cold touch of an order that was not his own. For 2 hours, the 2 men sat in silence, recording every movement of the light. The transmission did not stop. It was slow, painfully slow, as if the sender knew that a signal traveling through 2,000 miles of underwater copper would be smeared and distorted by the electrical capacity of the cable. The pulses were spaced wide apart, allowing the current to build and clear in the long wire, a technique that only the most skilled cable engineers understood. Whoever was speaking, they understood the physics of the cable as well as Kelvin himself. They knew the resistance of the copper, they knew the capacitance of the gutta percha, and they knew exactly how much power was required to move the tiny mirror on the Faraday's wall. As the first gray light of dawn began to show through the thick glass of the porthole, the character of the signal changed. The mathematical sequences ceased, and the light began to trace a single, continuous series of coordinates. Kelvin, his fingers ink-stained and stiff with the cold, translated the numbers as Arthur called them out. They were not random coordinates. When mapped against the charts, the latitude and longitude pointed to a place deep within their own sector, a region of the Atlantic Ocean where the seabed dropped into a colossal, unexplored chasm. The Atlantic Abyss. "It is a location," Kelvin said, his voice barely louder than the hum of the oil lamp. He looked down at the map he had drawn on a scrap of telegraph paper. A depth of over 5,000 fathoms. A place where the crust is thin and the water is as cold as space. And Arthur, it is directly beneath our route. But how could anyone transmit from there, sir? Arthur asked. The pressure would crush an iron pipe like paper. There are no cables in the Pacific. No wires. Nothing but water. Kelvin did not answer. He rose and walked to the porthole, looking out at the cold, empty sea. The waves were small now, their crests catching the pale yellow light of a sun that was still below the horizon. The Faraday rode the swells with a slow, heavy roll, a tiny speck of iron and wood on a gray desert that stretched for thousands of miles in every direction. For his entire life, Kelvin had believed that the Earth was a machine, a complex, beautiful clockwork of iron and stone, winding down slowly toward its final, cold rest. It was a dead thing, a stage upon which humanity played out its brief, bright history. But as he looked down at the dark water beneath the ship, he felt a strange and terrible certainty that the stage was occupied. The cable was not merely a wire between two stations. It was a finger dipped into a dark pool, and something in the depths of that pool had reached out and touched it. The telegraph had not failed. It had succeeded too well. We had laid our line across the floor of the world, thinking we were alone in the dark, and we had run it directly over the roof of someone else's house. The signal from the deep ocean floor did not print a name, nor did it offer a greeting. It simply typed, over and over, the same geographical coordinates and the same steady, ticking countdown, a message sent from the absolute silence of the abyss into the busy, noisy world of men. And in the test room of the Faraday, as the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, the green light on the wall continued to swing, a tiny, glowing pendulum counting down the hours to a meeting we had never planned to keep. This was the day the sea spoke to us. This was the moment the wire found the deep. This was the first transmission.